Imagine this. You're standing in the middle of a battlefield. Your mind the terrain, your thoughts the soldiers, your emotions the war drums beating in unpredictable rhythms. Around you, everything is smoke. No clear direction. Just noise, confusion swelling in waves, drowning logic, silencing intuition. You try to remember what you came here for, but the voices are too loud. They scream deadlines, fears, guilt, comparison, ambition, failure. You're caught in the chaos of your own consciousness, and worse, you've mistaken it for reality. This isn't war as you know it. No swords, no enemies in armor, only internal tremors, silent spirals. And yet you're exhausted as if you fought 1,000 battles and lost every single one. You wake up each day drowning before you've even left your bed. The second your eyes open, your mind begins to sprint. Looping thoughts, old regrets, unresolved conversations, future anxieties. You're not thinking, you're reacting. And that's the trap. The modern war is not fought with weapons. It's fought with distraction, overstimulation, fragmented identity, and information overload. Your mind is the battlefield, and you're losing daily. Have you ever had the feeling that despite being more connected than any generation before us, we've never felt more fragmented? That we have more access to knowledge than any sage in history, yet our thoughts are constantly in disarray? And that we have the freedom to choose our path yet follow routines we never chose? Despite all these privileges, we find ourselves stuck, struggling to make decisions, to connect with others, to truly be present. We feel disconnected, internally and externally. So why is this happening? In this video, we will delve into the idea that perhaps the chaos we experience is not just a product of external factors, but also the result of our own internal surrender. We'll explore why our minds are constantly bombarded with distractions and how this fragmentation is a deliberate strategy to keep us from achieving true clarity. Through a deep dive into ancient wisdom and modern psychology, we'll uncover the reasons behind this state of confusion and shed light on the ways we can take back control of our minds. Get ready to embark on a journey of self-discovery as we uncover the root causes of our fragmented state and learn how to overcome them. Join me in this exploration and let's start the journey. Now, look at the world you live in. Imagine a warrior from antiquity transported to the 21st century. His mind, honed for battle, would find itself overwhelmed in this new warfare. He would be bombarded by information, distracted by entertainment, and worn down by the subliminal messaging that pervades modern life. In such an environment, clarity becomes a luxury, a badge of honor, a testament to resilience. And so the pursuit of clarity becomes a quest. It's no longer about finding clarity, but proving oneself worthy of it. One measures their worth based on how much noise they can endure, how many tabs they can have open, how much multitasking they can handle. It's a distorted version of strength. Think of the warrior's mind as a sword. Over time, the constant jabs of notifications, the swipes of social media, the quick cuts of short-form videos, these all dull the sword. The more it's exposed to these distractions, the more its edge becomes worn. At some point, the sword loses its sharpness entirely, becoming unfit for the battles it was forged to fight. The same happens to our minds. As we get bombarded with information, our ability to think deeply, to concentrate and to be discerning gets blunted. We end up reacting rather than thinking, surrendering our agency to algorithms and autocomplete. We mistake activity for accomplishment, busyness for productivity, and noise for importance. In this way, the struggle for clarity becomes a badge of honor, a symbol of our ability to resist the distractions of our time. But is it really resistance if we're all moving in the same direction, chasing the same fleeting dopamine hit, all of us willingly dulling our minds in unison? What if the real challenge is not in resisting the distractions, but in choosing not to participate in this race to the bottom? What if the answer to regaining clarity lies not in fighting the noise, but in listening to the silence? The modern age is characterized by distraction, and this is intentional. Think of a nation. And its strength comes from its people, their ability to think, to create, to innovate. But what if a nation's potential could be harnessed if its people were distracted, fragmented, controlled? It's not about misinformation or disinformation. It's about infusing confusion. Why listen to someone trying to break through the noise to sell you something when you can tune into the background hum of doubt, the whisper of insecurity, the echo of unfulfilled desires? These are universal feelings, feelings that a fragmented consumer is more susceptible to. Now imagine a market where your attention is constantly captured, redirected, monetized. You're not sold a product, you're sold an experience, a feeling, an illusion of change. The more distracted you are, the deeper the illusion. In this state, you don't question what you buy what questions you won't ask. You don't think about who's making the decisions, you're too busy reacting to them. In essence, you don't fight a war with weapons anymore. You wage it with distraction, overstimulation, fragmented identity, and information overload. Now consider your mind. It's not about what enters your mind, but what occupies it. It's not about what you see, but what you allow to stick. Think of your mind as a canvas. It's not what the artist paints on it that matters, but what the audience sees. In this context, the artist is the information weaver, pulling colors from your emotions, fears, and aspirations to paint a picture that suits their narrative. The audience is you, the perceiver. It's not what's painted, but what you perceive that counts. For example, a skilled manipulator might paint fear onto your canvas, but it's your perception of that fear, your willingness to believe it, that gives it power. Manipulators are the generals of this mental warfare, orchestrating campaigns across your internal landscape, positioning their pieces with precision to provoke reactions that serve their interests. The grand strategy, confusing you the king, enough so that you abdicate your throne, allowing them to claim the victory by default. And the most insidious aspect of this manipulation is that it often masquerades as guidance. It's not presented as an attack, but as helpful advice, a well-intentioned suggestion. But behind this facade, there's a calculated move, a strategic maneuver to capture your mind and dictate your actions without you realizing it. We live in an age where clarity is not valued, but actively suppressed. Our very survival depends on seeing through the fog of war and recognizing who's manipulating it. By understanding how our minds have been programmed to surrender, we can begin to reclaim our mental sovereignty and navigate this complex world with clarity and purpose. The decline of the warrior's mind began subtly. It wasn't a sudden shift, but a slow erosion, a gradual descent into distraction. This process started with the loosening of ties to tradition, the weakening of community bonds, and the introduction of individualism as the primary virtue. With traditional support systems weakened, the individual became vulnerable to external influences. Suddenly, a person's identity was no longer rooted in community, but formed by consumption. Think of the warrior's mind as a fortress. Its strength lay in its thick walls and sturdy gates, representing the traditions and values that had stood the test of time. But when those very traditions were questioned, undermined, or forgotten, the fortress became vulnerable. The gates were left open, the drawbridge lowered without warning. Then came the whispers of inadequacy, subtle suggestions that gnawed at the warrior's confidence. This campaign of erosion was not conducted with brute force, but with the quiet persistence of doubt. It was as if someone had loosened the foundations of the warrior's beliefs without their knowledge, making the structure more susceptible to collapse. The warrior, once proud and resolute, became disoriented, unsure of their place, their purpose, and their values. This internal struggle led to a loss of focus, making the warrior vulnerable to outside influences. The path to reclaiming the warrior's mind involves rebuilding the foundations, reinforcing the walls, and remembering the strength that comes from tradition, community, and unwavering belief in oneself. It's about recognizing that true strength doesn't come from succumbing to the pressures of a changing world, but from staying true to one's roots while adapting to the challenges that lie ahead. Here's the crucial question: are you willing to pay the price for clarity? Remember, in the arena of mental warfare, there are no medals for participation. In this battle, you either stand tall with clarity or you fall back into the comforting embrace of confusion. The choice is yours. But here's the caveat: clarity is not a destination. It's a constant companion on the journey of life. It's not a static state, but a dynamic process that requires constant tending. Achieving mental clarity is not a finish line, but a starting gun for the race towards purposeful living. Sun Tzu, the ancient strategist, once said, "In the midst of chaos there is also opportunity." Imagine for a moment, what if mental clarity wasn't about controlling the storm, but becoming the eye of it? What if the chaos around you could be turned into an advantage, just like the generals of old turned ambushes into victories? But here's the twist. To find that clarity, you must first confront the real problem. Not the noise itself, but why you keep letting it in. Not the war, but your relationship to it. Because clarity isn't something you find. It's something you earn through understanding the terrain of your own mind. So now stand still in this battlefield. Feel the storm raging within, not to fight it, but to see it, name it, map it. Because before we learn how to win the war for clarity, we must first understand why we lost it in the first place. And that's where we go next. To the roots of this internal disorder, to the psychological architecture of confusion, to the philosophical cracks in the foundation of the modern mind. Because only by knowing why the chaos exists can you learn to command it like a true strategist. The mind's betrayal, why chaos feels like home. Remember, you weren't born in chaos, you learned it. You learned to internalize the noise of a world that profits from your disorientation. You inherited the myth that constant movement equals progress, that relentless mental chatter is a sign of ambition. You were never taught to be still, only to strive, not to see but to react. And like a fish unaware of the water it swims in, you've accepted mental turmoil as the default setting of existence. But what if the chaos isn't a byproduct of life, but a symptom of something deeper? Let's pull the veil back. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This is the root, not the noise outside, but the shadow within. You are not just overwhelmed by information, you are haunted by the unexamined. Every unprocessed emotion, every suppressed fear, every part of you that was pushed into silence to be accepted by society. They all live beneath the surface, running scripts, hijacking your clarity. Jung called it the shadow, the part of the psyche we disown. The selfishness you deny, the rage you conceal, the sadness you medicate. You bury it, not realizing that what you repress grows teeth, and in chaos it emerges, not with clarity, but with confusion, projection, and self-sabotage. So here's the truth. Your mind isn't chaotic because the world is complex. It's chaotic because you've built a house of mirrors with no doors, reflecting fears, amplifying doubt, and drowning the self in infinite distractions. Enter Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who warned that modern man would drown not from lack of water, but from too much truth too fast. He said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But what happens when you don't have a why? What happens when your how becomes your identity? In the absence of deeper meaning, you fill the void with motion. You chase goals that don't belong to you. You compare yourself to avatars, carefully curated digital selves. You trade presence for progress. And slowly, unknowingly, you fracture. The result? A mind in civil war. You become 1,000 selves. The one that wants rest, and the one that whispers guilt for wanting it. The one that craves meaning, and the one that numbs it with endless scrolling. The one that longs for purpose, and the one that sabotages every attempt to find it. Schopenhauer once called life a pendulum, swinging between pain and boredom. But maybe today it swings between overstimulation and numbness. And in between, clarity dies. Add to this the societal machinery. From birth, you've been groomed to be a consumer, not a creator. You were not taught how to think, but what to think. You were rewarded for memorizing, not for questioning. You were prepared for a marketplace, not for meaning. Aldous Huxley foresaw it in Brave New World, a society not oppressed by what it fears, but by what it loves. Pleasure, distraction, comfort. He warned of a time when truth would drown in a sea of irrelevance. Welcome to that time. You ask why you can't focus, but your dopamine system is hijacked. You ask why you're anxious, but your nervous system is overstimulated. You ask why you're unfulfilled, but you've never been allowed to ask what you truly want. And here lies the most overlooked truth. Chaos isn't just noise, it's familiar. It's safe, because silence would mean hearing your real thoughts. Stillness would mean meeting your shadow. So you stay busy, loud, distracted. Jean-Paul Sartre, the father of existentialism, argued that freedom is terrifying, because with freedom comes responsibility. It means owning your life instead of blaming circumstances. So instead you build cages made of habits and call it identity. You drown in complexity and call it intelligence. You submit to chaos and call it normal. But the psyche keeps score. Every time you avoid truth, your mind fragments. Every time you suppress emotion, your clarity blurs. Every time you seek approval over authenticity, your soul goes quiet. And slowly, without noticing, you become a stranger to yourself. You look in the mirror and something feels off. Not wrong, not broken, just absent. Because the self cannot live in exile forever. So now the question becomes urgent. How do you return? How do you reclaim clarity in a world designed to fracture it? Sun Tzu said, "Know yourself and you will win all battles." But the modern self is a collage of borrowed desires, repressed truths, and reactive impulses. To know yourself now is an act of rebellion. But before we speak of strategy, we must acknowledge the cost of delay, the price you pay for not confronting the chaos, because the consequences aren't abstract. They're everywhere, silent, hidden, but devastating. You've felt them. And in the next chapter, we'll uncover the price of a disordered mind, how it shapes your relationships, distorts your sense of reality, and keeps you locked in loops disguised as living. The battlefield is set. But now, it's time to see what's really at stake. The silent collapse of the self. You wake up. You check your phone before you even check in with yourself. Notifications hit like arrows. The world floods in. You're already behind. And yet, nothing has happened. This is how it begins. Not with a scream, but a whisper. A quiet erosion of clarity. Not because you're weak or lazy, but because you've been conditioned to operate in a mental environment that mimics war. Constant alerts, information overload, and no space to breathe. But unlike real war, there's no obvious enemy, only a slow, unseen collapse of the self. Sun Tzu warned that the greatest victories are won without fighting, but he also implied something darker. The greatest defeats happen the same way, and in this case, your mind is losing without you noticing. The true danger of chaos isn't that it's loud, it's that it becomes your normal. It distorts your perception. It turns your instincts against you. Let's look at how. Cognitive distortion becomes the baseline. In a chaotic mind, the brain doesn't just misfire, it rewires. Your prefrontal cortex, the seat of logic and planning, goes dim. The amygdala, your emotional panic switch, lights up like a siren. Your body prepares for danger. Even if there isn't any. This is why you catastrophize minor setbacks. Why do you overthink text messages? Why does silence feel threatening? Neuroscience calls it amygdala hijack, a state where your brain is locked into fight, flight, or freeze. You're reacting, not reasoning. You're surviving, not living. You confuse activity for purpose and urgency for importance, but it doesn't stop there. Chaos makes you forget who you are. You become a shapeshifter. At work, you're hyperproductive. At home, you collapse into numbness. Online, you perform with confidence. Alone, you question everything. Your sense of self fractures into roles, masks, and fragments. And soon, identity isn't rooted in essence, it's reactive. You become what the moment demands, what the algorithm rewards, and what others expect. This is the death of being. Not a loud death, but a quiet burial beneath expectation and overstimulation. Relationships suffer in silence. When your mind is disordered, intimacy becomes performance. Listening becomes waiting to speak. Vulnerability feels unsafe. Real connection is traded for dopamine hits, texts, likes, short bursts of attention, but no depth. You begin to fear depth. Because to be truly seen requires clarity. And clarity has a price. It demands you stop hiding. Most people won't pay for it, so they build bonds out of convenience, not truth. Love becomes a negotiation. Friendship becomes a distraction. Connection becomes simulation. This is the tragedy of a chaotic society. People are starving for meaning, but too mentally fragmented to sit with silence long enough to find it. You mistake movement for progress. You stay busy, productive, ambitious, but not aligned. You set goals, hit targets, chase milestones, and yet a deep hollowness lingers. The kind of ache you feel not from doing the wrong thing, but from never stopping long enough to ask what the right thing is. Philosopher Viktor Frankl wrote in Man's Search for Meaning, "When a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure. This is modern life, a constant search for meaning interrupted by meaningless interruptions. So we consume endless content, shallow entertainment, constant novelty. But what we call content is often containment, a prison made of noise, numbing the part of you that's quietly screaming, 'This isn't it.' Mental chaos becomes physical sickness. This isn't metaphorical. Chronic stress rewires your brain, inflames your body, and wrecks your immune system. Your digestion suffers. Your sleep breaks down. You develop chronic fatigue, hormonal imbalances, and memory loss. You forget where you put your keys, and slowly, you forget who you are." Gabor Maté, the physician and trauma expert, has spoken of how the body keeps the score when the mind refuses to listen. Addiction, burnout, autoimmune disease, all can be traced in part to prolonged disconnection, from self, from silence, from clarity. But here's the worst part. You blame yourself for all of it. You call it laziness, weakness, a lack of discipline. But it's not weakness, it's misalignment. It's not laziness, it's exhaustion. Your inner world has been at war and you've never been trained to fight on that battlefield. You were taught to chase success, not to understand suffering. You were taught to win arguments, not to understand yourself. You were taught to be seen, not to see. And in that blindness, you became prey, not to a person, but to a system. A system that thrives when you feel just anxious enough to buy, just insecure enough to hustle harder, just distracted enough to not question anything. This is psychological warfare, without bullets. But the casualties are real: lost potential, fragmented identity, and a life unlived. So what's the cost of mental chaos? Everything. Because without clarity, you can't love deeply. You can't create freely. You can't think independently. You can't be fully. And the longer you stay in that fog, the more you forget that there's even another way to live. But what if there is? Sun Tzu said, "In the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity." That's not a motivational slogan. It's a blueprint. Because within the noise, there is a way back. A strategy, not for outer victory, but for inner stillness, for reclaiming your mind from the storm. But it will require rebellion, it will require silence, and it will demand that you stop long enough to see. The next chapter isn't about reaction, it's about revolution. Because to think clearly in a chaotic world isn't just rare, it's radical. And maybe it's time. To see clearly is to rebel silently. You don't need a sword, you need silence. You don't need to fight the world. You need to stop letting it dictate the battlefield. This is the first truth of the rebellion. Clarity isn't given, it's claimed. But not the kind you've been taught. No blood, no battle cries. Only a quiet, deliberate refusal to let your mind be colonized. Sun Tzu understood this centuries ago. He wrote, "If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. But what if the enemy isn't external? What if it's the noise in your head, the inherited beliefs, the manufactured urgency, the invisible programming telling you who to be?" Then clarity becomes subversion. And the first step is simple, radical, and almost impossible. Do nothing. Sit. Be still. Not as escapism, but as rebellion. When you withdraw from chaos, even briefly, you begin to see not just what's outside you, but what's within you, your true motivations, your hidden wounds, your unspoken desires. This is the battlefield where transformation begins, because the world wants you fast, reactive, hungry, loud, but wisdom is slow. The response is deliberate, insight is quiet. So here is the rebellion. 1. Detachment is power. You were taught that control equals power, but Sun Tzu flipped the script. The greatest victory is that which requires no battle. This only happens when you detach, not from caring, but from clinging. Detach from needing constant validation. Detach from outrage cycles, from breaking news that breaks your soul, from the pressure to always be on. In detachment, you regain energy. Because what drains you isn't doing too much, it's doing too much that doesn't matter. Mental clarity begins the moment you stop engaging with what you can't control. This isn't apathy, it's precision. You're not here to fight every war, only the ones that matter. 2. Create sacred boundaries with time and attention. Attention is the new currency. If they control where you look, they control what you become. So ask yourself, when did you last own your time? Not rent it to algorithms, not donate it to distractions, but fully own it. Begin small, wake up without reaching for your phone. Block out 30 minutes daily for thought, with no consumption. Schedule your thinking like others schedule meetings. It sounds simple, but it's revolutionary. Because the modern world is built to keep you reactive, not reflective. The moment you take your time back, even a sliver, you create a mental clearing. A space where clarity can finally speak, and it whispers truth. 3. Shed the false self. You've been carrying masks, the achiever, the pleaser, the rebel, the perfect one, the strong one. Each mask is created to survive something, but they become prisons when worn too long. Carl Jung called this the persona, the version of ourselves we create for the world. But behind it lies the self, buried but waiting. So ask, who am I performing for and why? And more importantly, what parts of me have I silenced just to be accepted? To break free, you must unlearn. Unlearn the metrics of success that were never yours. Unlearn the shame that isn't native to your soul. Unlearn the roles you were cast in by culture, family, and fear. This is painful, but it's clean pain, the kind that heals. And in that shedding, clarity rushes in like a cold wind, sharp, honest, alive. 4. Adopt strategic stillness. Sun Tzu wrote, "He will win who knows when to fight and when not to fight." Strategic stillness is the ability to pause, to not respond, when everything in you wants to react. In an argument, in an emotional storm, in a moment of self-doubt. Stillness isn't passivity, it's power withheld until it matters. It's the leader who pauses before speaking, the artist who refuses to create on demand, the man or woman who chooses their battles with surgical intent. Stillness gives you leverage, because when the world is frantic, the calm person sees everything. You see the motivations beneath the words, the patterns behind the chaos. You become the chess player while others play checkers with their lives, and you don't just survive, you direct. 5. Cultivate internal sovereignty. This is the final step, and it's the most essential. Sovereignty is when your inner state is no longer dictated by external events. It's not cold detachment, it's deep grounding. When insult doesn't shake your identity, when silence doesn't spark insecurity, when solitude feels like richness, not punishment. You become a sovereign mind, a force not pushed around by the winds of public opinion or your own unprocessed emotions. It's the shift from reactive to responsive, from triggered to tuned in, from fragmented to whole. This is the highest form of mental clarity, and it is won through daily rebellion, of thought, of behavior, of belief. But here's the catch, this path is lonely. You'll be misunderstood. People will call you distant, arrogant, cold. Because clarity makes people uncomfortable. It's a mirror they're not ready to face, but that's not your concern. Your job is not to be understood, it's to understand. To see clearly in a world trained to look away. And from that clarity, act, not compulsively but intentionally. Sun Tzu didn't teach chaos. He taught control over chaos, through strategy, through silence, through seeing. So here's your strategy. Don't react, redirect. Don't fight for approval, fight for alignment. Don't chase clarity, create space for it. You won't always win, but you'll never be truly lost again. Because once you've seen the game, you can't unsee it. And once you've reclaimed your mind, no one, not society, not trauma, not chaos, can ever truly own it again. Finally, the most powerful realization is, the warrior sees through the fog. Imagine this, you're standing in the eye of a storm. Around you, winds scream with every fear you've known, failure, rejection, abandonment, death. Lightning flashes with the glare of expectations. Debris spins, titles, roles, identities, opinions, all the noise you've mistaken for truth. But within that eye, within that stillness, you see something, not with your eyes, with something deeper, something ancient. It's unknowing, And it doesn't scream, it doesn't demand, it simply is. This is the ultimate truth, the final clarity that shatters every illusion. There is no enemy. The chaos was never outside you, the fog, the confusion, the war, it was always within. And every time you sought control, it slipped through your fingers. Because clarity doesn't come from dominance. It comes from surrender. Not surrender to the world, but surrender to reality, to what is, without distortion, without resistance. Sun Tzu said, "The wise warrior avoids the battle, not out of fear, but because he sees the terrain so clearly he doesn't need to fight. He has already won before a sword is drawn." You've heard this line before, but you misunderstood it. You thought knowing the enemy meant outsmarting someone else. You thought knowing yourself meant understanding your personality, your patterns, and your goals. But here's the deeper truth. To know yourself is to realize there was never a self to defend. Let that sit. All your life you've been taught to be someone, to construct a self, a story, a legacy. But that self, it's made of mirrors. Mirrors held up by other people, by trauma, by culture, by comparison. When you were praised, you felt real. When you were ignored, you questioned your worth. When you were misunderstood, you lashed out, not to hurt others, but to prove you exist. But here is the final lesson. You are not your thoughts. You are not your roles. You are not your fears. You are awareness itself. Still, unmoving, ever present, the witness behind the warrior. This is what clarity ultimately reveals, not how to navigate chaos, but how to see through its illusion entirely. The battlefield was a theater. The enemies were projections. The war was with a ghost. Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "He who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster." But what if the monster was just your shadow? What if the war was always your mind trying to fix the very illusions it created? Viktor Frankl, imprisoned in the camps of Auschwitz, stripped of everything, status, safety, family, found a secret. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. That's clarity, that's the final rebellion. Not changing the world, not dominating your mind, but choosing presence in the face of madness. So what now? You've come this far. You've shed layers. You've stared into yourself. You've tasted silence and seen the machine for what it is. Where do you go from here? Nowhere. There is no next. Because clarity isn't a destination. It's not a fixed state. It's a moment-to-moment recognition of truth. It's when you stop running, when you stop fixing, when you stop asking, "What should I be?" and instead simply be. It's in watching your thoughts pass like clouds, no longer mistaking them for weather. It's in smiling at your own madness and then releasing it. It's in walking through life like a lucid dreamer, fully awake, fully present, yet unattached. And in that presence, something extraordinary happens. You move through the world with precision. You speak only when needed. You act only when aligned. You no longer seek applause, because you're no longer performing. You become dangerous in the most sacred way. Not because you destroy, but because you see. See systems for what they are. See people beyond their masks. See yourself, not as the role, the voice, the brand, but as the space beneath it all. This is power without aggression, peace without ignorance, clarity without effort, and so you return to the storm, not to be consumed by it, but to walk through it untouched. You return to the noise, not to block it out, but to no longer believe it. You return to the self, not to fix it, but to watch it dissolve into something deeper. You are the eye of the storm, not because you control it, but because you've stopped identifying with the wind. You are the warrior who doesn't fight. You are the eye of the storm, not because you control it, but because you've stopped identifying with the wind. You are the warrior who doesn't fight, because he sees no need to, because the war was an illusion all along. Sun Tzu didn't give us a book of war. He gave us a map back to clarity, a manual for inner stillness disguised as strategy. And now you see it. You see that clarity isn't found in the absence of chaos. It's found in your presence within it. You see that your greatest weapon isn't your mind, it's your awareness of it. And you see finally that mental clarity isn't about controlling thoughts, emotions, or outcomes. It's about seeing through them, and walking forward anyway, unmoved, undistracted, just here, now, whole.